I never really had a plan to end up where it is now. So it's been 10 years of the podcast and 720 something. Actually, with all the kind of the roundups and the specials and everything that I've done, it's actually closer to 800, which is a lot of content. I recently kind of finished getting some gaps in the transcriptions done, and it's 3 million words.
Wow.
I've always tried to be consistent. Even when I started, I said I'm going to do 50 episodes before I decide whether I'm going to carry on with this or not.
I saw someone come up to you and say like, yeah, I listened to your podcast when I started in recruiting and this is how I learned. So the creator economy, all of this has really exploded. So different from how it was when you first started.
The creator economy has just kind of sprung up around me. So it's been an interesting journey for me because I first of all had to have lots of debates with myself about, do I go all in with video? Am I a video? Am I audio? What am I?
Most creators chase quick wins, downloads, clicks, and viral moments. But Matt Alder has always played the long game. For over 15 years, he's used podcasting not just to talk, but to shape the conversation around the future of talent. He's built one of the most trusted shows in the space, Recruiting Future, and influenced how an entire industry thinks about work. I've been lucky enough to co-host the Alder Hour with him for close to a year, which means I've seen firsthand how much thought and consistency go into everything he creates. Today, I'm flipping the mic to ask, what does it really take to build authority over time, and why does that kind of influence matter more than ever? Matt, welcome to Workfluencer.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to talk to you, and I'm loving being on your podcast already.
Amazing. It was funny. Every time I interview a fellow podcaster, the beginning that we don't get to record is like, can you hear me? Is this working? Is the sound good? And we had a good 5 minutes of that.
We've got too much kit between us. That's the trouble. We just need to record this straight into a laptop. It'll probably be easier.
Amazing. So really, let's start at the beginning. Like, what made you hit record 15 years ago, and why podcasting?
Yeah, it's a good question. So originally, I started off as a blogger. So yeah, this was a really long time ago. It might be difficult to imagine, but there weren't many blogs. There were no podcasts or very few podcasts and very, very few blogs, which meant there were some really kind of influential blogs about recruiting that I was reading. And I just really fancied joining the conversation. So we didn't even have, LinkedIn wasn't really social. Blogging was the only real way to get your thoughts out there at that kind of scale. So I started a blog. It was one of the first sort of blogs in Europe around recruiting, and it was called Recruiting Future. So that's where the name came from. And I wrote the blog consistently for quite some time. And then I've always been fascinated by audio, radio, all of that kind of stuff. And as podcasting started to develop, because back then, a podcast was something that you listened to on an iPod that you had to sort of plug into the computer to download. It wasn't a very smooth process. But as podcasting started to develop, I got really interested in it, and I started doing audio interviews on the blog because I was a bit fed up of writing all the time, if I'm honest. I thought I'll just do these audio interviews, and then it just kind of occurred to me that I should just flip it and actually turn the blog into a podcast, because I was getting quite good feedback about the audio interviews that I'd done. Podcasting was sort of starting to emerge as a thing. So I did it. So I sort of said, right, I'm going to do a podcast. I am all in. I'm going to do 50 episodes before I even look at the numbers and all this kind of stuff. And really the motivation for doing it was to sort of continue to try and sort of establish a thought leadership bit, but also, most of my work at that time was as a sort of an innovation consultant. And I was talking to lots of people in my research. And I just thought it would be great to actually, why don't I just record these interviews and, make them public? So that's kind of really how it started. So I never really had a plan to end up where it is now. I think I perhaps hoped that it might do well, but it really kind of started for for lots of sort of other reasons to the reason that I run it now.
And you're at episode 700 plus at this moment, right?
Yeah. So it's been 10 years of the podcast and 720 something. Actually, with all the kind of the roundups and the specials and everything that I've done, it's actually closer to 800, which is a lot of content. If you, I recently kind of finished kind of getting some gaps in the transcriptions done, and it's 3 million words. People have spoken over that time.
If you've made it this far into the episode and you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. You've mastered podcasting as a medium, right? But you're also genuinely an expert in recruiting. Which came first?
Yeah, good question. When I started the podcast, I was really, up to that point in my career, I've really focused the most on recruitment marketing. So recruitment marketing was my background. I also kind of, ran a team, got involved in lots of other aspects of recruiting. I worked for a couple of big recruitment marketing agencies that were also sort of RPOs in their own right. So, did a lot of kind of stuff around the recruitment process, but really recruitment marketing was my main thing. And then social media kind of came along, and writing about social media, you end up kind of encompassing much more than just marketing. And really 10 years of interviewing TA leaders and thought leaders every week has just been a massive education for me in terms of, what's going on in the space and how we think about it. And in some ways, the podcast has been an education project in terms of talking to people I want to talk to, finding out what's going on, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think many people maybe don't know this, but when you start podcasting, I realized it early on. It's like, wait, I'm learning so much from these people. It's like I'm generally, and most episodes, or I would say every episode, learning something that I did not know or changing my mind about something. So it's really educational for you as a podcaster.
Yeah, no, I 100%. I think also one of the, particularly if you're a podcaster who does interviews, I think the biggest attribute you have to have is curiosity. Really, because then I think you just ask better questions, because it's kind of like, why did you do that? And what's that? And you get a kind of an interesting mix of guests on and that kind of stuff. So I think that's a big thing.
Yeah. It's definitely a big thing. When you look back now, like what role has consistency played in like building your reputation and your influence?
Yeah. I like what you said about the long game. And I think, it's something that, gets lost in the search for clicks and quarterly targets and, the speed at which everything goes. So, I've always tried to be consistent. Even when I started, I said I'm going to do 50 episodes before I decide whether I'm going to carry on with this, or not. And, over time, the frequency of what I do is increased. So I think I started at once a month or twice a month. And now, I'm all the way up at twice a week. But really, I think if you are doing a podcast that isn't a kind of a season-based podcast, then, that consistency is critical, because also, there are key times like the summer and holiday time where all the other kind of podcasts just drop off, but people still keep listening. And in fact, they listen to podcasts more when they've got that kind of time. So really just, for me, it's just been about showing up consistently every week, and paying attention to everything else that's going on, trends in being a creator and all that kind of stuff. But really, at the same time, just just kind of carrying on relentlessly through all of it. It's been interesting.
How does like a typical day look like for you? Do you do this full time?
Yeah, pretty much now. I would say it's probably about 70 or 80% of what I do. So, just the mechanics of it, I do 2 episodes a week, plus sometimes special episodes and things like that. So they are nearly all interviews. So that's a lot of people to handle in terms of interviews. As of about, I don't think I did this for the first sort of 4 or 5 years, but for at least the last 5 years, even if I know the person really well, or even if they're famous, I want to talk to them before we have the show. And really over the last couple of years, that's been really important in terms of shaping the story of the interview and kind of how it works and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, 2 guests a week. That's 2 I need to do 2 recordings for that. I need to have 2 meetings for that. So it kind of racks up in terms of that sort of stuff. I have an editor now who does a lot of my editing, but there's still a huge amount of work to do with titles and introductions and the commercial side of it in terms of finding sponsors and keeping sponsors happy. And then, of course, I think probably the thing I spend the most time on is actually finding guests, because that's the most important thing. And I think that I've seen lots of people do interview podcasts, and you can tell that the finding the guest bit is the bit they've left to last, because it's like, oh, I'll just go, get my mates on, or find some names in the industry to come on and be on the show, and that's bound to get me traffic. And it just doesn't work like that. If you're an interview based podcast, the quality, the diversity, the relevance of your guests to your audience is the most critical thing. So that's really where I put the most work in.
That's interesting. What's your criteria for who makes a good guest for Recruiting Future?
I don't have really strict criteria, because I think that, people can be really surprising. And I always want to try and stay a little bit flexible in terms of what's going on in the market and all that sort of stuff. I mean, ideally, I want people who sound great on a podcast, but not necessarily people who've been on a podcast before. I've had lots of people on, and it's the first time they've done a podcast. And I'm very kind of conscious of that, of helping people through the process, because doing a podcast can be the weirdest thing in the world. It's like, I've been talking for 5 minutes. I haven't got an audience. I don't know whether you're still listening, what's going on. So helping through people through that is kind of important. But really the criteria, it's all based on the audience. And this is the biggest thing that I learned. So when I started the podcast, I was putting things on that I found interesting. Basically. Now, because I'm all about innovation and technology and cutting edge stuff, there was just some episodes of the podcast that I absolutely loved, but no one really wanted to listen. No one really was ready to listen to. So from that kind of point on, I've just been really, really aware of what is it that the audience wants to hear. But also, what is it that the audience needs to hear? Because sometimes I want to push the audience as well to think about things they've not thought about before. But really, that audience is what dictates the guests for me. So there will be times when I'm interviewing someone who's probably a fantastic guest, but they're talking about a topic that not that I don't really want to talk about it, but I'm a bit like, oh yeah, I know this, I know all this, all that sort of stuff. But it's really important because it's a topic that's important to the audience. So it really is the audience that kind of defines everything that goes on the show.
How do you go about listening to your audience and getting that feedback? Do you ask directly? Is there analytics that you look at?
Yeah, it's a combination. It's a combination of things. So, I've done sort of audience surveys before. I'm always, I get a lot of feedback, which is great. So people send me, and please, if you listen to podcasts, send me feedback, because I do read all. I think I reply to all as well. So people will send me feedback, say, I love the show or whatever. And I'll ask them, what is it about the show that you like? Who do you want to see on next? So that's kind of, that's a big part of it. So talking directly to people when I can. And obviously conferences and things like that, talking to people, trying to find out, what's going on. So that's part of it. But also just looking at the numbers, looking at, was the episode popular? How long did people listen to this particular episode for? That episode was more popular than this episode. Why was that? It's not always about the content. It might be about the timing of the release or something like that. But just having that kind of sort of holistic view of what's going on. But at the same time, keeping a really close eye on the market and actually say, do you know what? We need someone from outside the industry to come and talk about this. So yeah, it's kind of a mix, but I'm just really always, and looking at what people are talking about on LinkedIn, there are just so many different sources that kind of go into it. It's not just all about, numbers and listeners and downloads and things like that. Because I think with a niche business podcast, which is what we do, if you influence one person, or you help one person, that's a result, I think, because, we're talking about smaller, we're We don't have audiences of multi-millions of people. And so to me, it's kind of, that's just really important.
Yeah. And I experienced firsthand, I was with you at one of the conferences that we've been at recently. And I saw someone come up to you and say like, yeah, I listened to your podcast when I started in recruiting and this is how I learned. I was like, what a cool feeling. And of course you were like totally like humble about it and normal. That's just who you are. But I was here like fangirling at the fan person moment that was happening. I was like, ooh, that is so cool.
I'm British, so I find that thing slightly embarrassing. But no, it's fine. I love feedback like that because podcasting is quite a lonely. It's quite a lonely way of creating stuff because obviously I do video as well, but a lot of it is just audio and it's me staring at a wall talking. And it's you see the numbers, so people are listening, but it's always good to hear what people have got from it. And that's quite a common one, actually. I've sort of listened to your podcast throughout my career, which makes me feel very old, but is also great. And I had someone at an event a couple of years ago who told me that they'd actually moved jobs and changed the trajectory of their TA career because of something they heard on my podcast. And luckily it worked out really well for them. So that was that was good. So yeah, I mean that to me is kind of that to me is success. That means I'm doing the right thing.
Talk about pressure. Switching their career path because of something they heard on your podcast, but that's amazing. So the creator economy, all of this has really exploded. So different from how it was when you first started. How has your approach to being a creator evolved over the years?
Yeah, it's interesting. The creator economy has just kind of sprung up around me. It's just like, what's going on here? And I've been lucky because podcasting is still very much on trend. It's very powerful. It's still a kind of big thing. So it's been an interesting journey for me because, I first of all had to have lots of debates with myself about, do I go all in with video? Am I a video? Am I audio? What am I doing? So that's been interesting. The way that, creators and conferences interface with each other is really interesting because if I go back 15 years, it was bloggers. They were considered to be influencers. So you talked about influence and blogging, and now we talk about content and creating and brands and stuff like that. So it's kind of like having two jobs because I've got the whole talent acquisition and talent thing, but then keeping up to date with what's going on with podcasting, but also the broader creator economy. Luckily I find it fascinating and I'm a real geek about it. But yeah, things have changed dramatically in the last few years, and it's brilliant to see so many people creating fantastic content. I'm just absolutely delighted that we've got such great creators in our space, just doing really great stuff. And I think that more brands should pay attention really because it's it's a noisy old world out there. If you're sort of, trying to reach people and reaching people through established voices and people who can just produce fantastic content, I think it's just such an important thing.
Do you think the brands in our space have caught on to the times and what's happening and how people are listening or getting their information?
Yeah, some of them have. Some of them have massively. I'm sure you probably know who they are. So some of them have really kind of doubled down on this. What I've seen is we've kind of had a bit of an evolution. So if we go back sort of, 2 years ago, there was a period in the sort of the first slowdown after the post-pandemic. So the pandemic was kind of all about, creators and conferences weren't going on. It's like podcasts and video and stuff like that. And then there was a bit of a kind of a rationalization where the marketing people that I were talking to became very, very focused on hard metrics. So it's like, we want demos. We want demos. We want this. We've got a funnel. We've got all this kind of stuff. So with podcasting is quite different to some of the other mediums. And it's like, there isn't that sort of direct click path to a demo. However, it's probably the most influential medium that there is. So I've been really pleased in the last 18 months that marketing teams have kind of shifted towards, well, hang on a minute, we can book all these demos, but if people don't know who we are, and we're not connected with the community, then we're not going to convert or retain this business. So it kind of feels to me that there's been a kind of a mindset shift, but I still think that people are kind of sort of massively underestimating the power of this type of content, and also kind of really assessing it in the wrong way in terms of how they think about the pricing and how they think about the measurements of success. So yeah, it's still a bit frustrating, but I feel that there is some progress.
Quick break. If you've been thinking about starting a podcast but don't know where to begin, I've got something for you. I'm letting women in TA, HR, or employer brand take over the Workfluencer Podcast for one episode.
I am so excited to be able to do a podcast takeover.
And I'm joining Rhona Pierce today as a guest host. Rhona is the creator of the Workfluencer Podcast.
You get a behind-the-scenes look at how I plan and produce everything. I handle all the editing, and you walk away with a fully edited episode, social clips, and the audio to launch your own pod if you want. If that sounds like your kind of test drive, head over to workfluencerpodcast.com to apply. So as a creator and a successful creator in this space, how do you have those conversations? Like when you talk to potential sponsors or brands that you're partnering with, how do you guys define and measure success?
I think you've got to find out what it is that company's looking for. So, if it's like, we want to really, we want to kind of affect the sentiment around our brand. We want influence. We want people talking about us. We want content, because I think the other great thing about the work that we do is it's not just for us. It's like content that brands can use, and, all that sort of stuff. They want content. They want all those kind of things. So, I really try and find out what people want from the start. And I think if it's just this kind of, do you know what? No, we want leads, and we're measuring this on very hard metrics. I probably won't do the campaign, to be honest with you, because it's just, I could I can be confident that I could deliver those things, but you can't really measure them from the way that podcasting works. And I'd much rather work with people who are looking to, kind of, maybe at a different stage in their kind of their marketing journey, and are sort of really looking to, kind of raise that awareness, get people thinking positively about the brand. And also, I think that, this type of content really helps close deals that are already in the funnel. So, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, all of that kind of stuff. And that never gets taken into consideration, because, certainly with the sponsors that I work with, they've got very long sales cycles. Some of them have sales cycles up to a year, and it's like, you have to keep people moving through that. So I just, I'm just sort of very sort of keen to find out what people's motivations are, and also just explain to them the sort of unique benefits of podcasting, which I can talk about in a second, and how that might help them, and we just sort of take it from there, basically.
Yeah, I've gotten to the point through experience now that I have a drop down in, okay, yeah, we're going to work together. Let's talk about this. Let's fill out this quick form before we jump on a deeper call. And I specifically put in one of the things, what's your top goal? When they click on that demos one, I already know we're having a different conversation. And this is either going to be a call that we continue talking for the 45 minutes, or it ends in like 10, 15 minutes, because like you can't, like you said, it's so hard to track the demos and stuff like that. And if that's what you're going to be measuring, because people don't say like, hey, most people don't say, hey, I came to you from listening to you on my walk. I was listening to Recruiting Future and I heard about this.
Yeah. And also, and the other thing is, I find this is really frustrating for me, but, if they don't report that back when that gets lost in the mix of when they're making a sale. So, I've got a particular client who, is continually sort of saying to me, I wish more people said that they'd heard about us on your podcast. And, I know six companies who've bought their product who've said to me separately, I first came across them on your podcast. So it's like they tell me, but
that happens so much. Or like,
everything is kind of tracked digitally and electronically. Again, it gets lost from the, mix, which is frustrating, but it is, podcasts are incredibly influential just because of the way that they operate as a medium.
What are the main benefits that you see from podcasting as far as when it comes to influencing consumers and just people in general?
So, let me go through them. So the probably the most interesting thing about podcasting is when people listen to it. So people will listen to podcasts when they're normally doing something else. So the washing up, traveling on a plane, walking the dog. I remember someone sent me a message once saying that they listened to my podcast every morning when they were doing their sit-ups, which was, perhaps too much information. But so people are doing something else, but they're doing something that's kind of not very taxing on their brain. Something habitual, which actually means their brain is much more open to taking in information. The other thing is, they're not in a conference. They're not looking at LinkedIn. They're not being bombarded by millions of other marketing messages. And then the other aspect of that is 99% of people listen to podcasts through some kind of headphones. So your voice is going directly into their head, directly into their brain at a point where they're not getting any other marketing messages, at a point when their brain is most susceptible to taking in information. And I've not just made this up. This comes from scientific research that's been done on podcasts, all the time. So that's a really big part of it. People are very open to listening to messages. There's a huge amount of research about how positively sponsorship messages and marketing messages on podcasts are actually received by the audience, particularly if the podcast host is reading them, and also if the sponsor is very much aligned to the values of that host and the values of that podcast, and it feels authentic, which for me is important. There are companies that I have not refused to work with before because I didn't feel that we kind of completely aligned on that. So again, there's an element of trust about this as well, because people listen to that podcast habitually. They trust what the host says. If the host is effectively endorsing a particular vendor or recommending they take a look at them, they tend to do it. So it's very powerful from that perspective. Also, it's long form in a world of short form messages, so there's a chance to get more information across. And this is the issue, because if someone's listening to the podcast, they're walking their dog, they're thinking, oh, that's a really interesting that they're always talking about that company. I'll check them out. There's no click path for that. It's just they're just going to go and do it. Whenever they do it. So yeah, I think they're the advantages of it. Also, it's evergreen content. My podcast doesn't really cover the news of the day or anything like that. And there are great podcasts that do that. People are listening to my podcast episodes from 5 or 6 years ago and still finding them relevant. So there's a massive shelf life about them as well, which you don't really get with anything else that I can think of. I can't think of any other thing like that where it's as accessible 3 or 4 years later than it is in the moment. So yeah, there's just some. I could go on for about another hour, but let's not bore everyone with them.
Yeah, I like to tell people really podcasting is like the same way we used to talk about blogging a decade ago. that's how like the reach and the evergreenness of the content. It's really amazing. I like get people commenting or like writing to me stuff about like my very first episode last year. And I was like, the podcast had a different name. I was like cringe, like maybe I should go back and re-edit those episodes because I was editing them. Now I have not that I'm not a professional at this, but my team, I believe, is way better at this than I am. I'm like, should I go back to those episodes? And people are listening to things from a year ago.
I would beg people not to listen to the first 10 episodes of my podcast. They're still there. But I get messages like that as well. Someone's like, I've just found your podcast. I thought I'd go back to episode 1. It's like, really? It's not Game of Thrones. You don't have to like follow the story through. But if you want to, that's fine. But don't listen to the first 10 episodes.
That is commitment because you've got 700 plus episodes. So going back to episode 1,
I think I had 400 at the time. But even so, that's a lot to listen to.
That's a lot. And I like to tell brands, like just this week, I had someone, this was before this podcast. This was before I was even talking in this niche. I was doing content for job seekers and I had someone schedule a call, like an automated call for like a discovery call for service I haven't sold since like 2020. And I was like, how did this person find this link? And like my main goal on that call was to figure out how they found that link because I had to go take that link down. Well, it was from back in the day. I went on someone else's podcast prior, like 2019. And they had the link. So I had to be like, hey, I don't sell this anymore. Your episode's doing fine. Yeah. It's doing great still. Can you like remove that CTA? Please?
I think that's the thing as well. And, for me, one of the biggest things about my podcast is that evergreen nature of it that, and it just creates a big back catalog over time. And I think also with the way that podcast advertising's changed, so you can do dynamic insertion, so you can actually put ads in that back catalog. Timed specifically kind of around it, which is kind of amazing. And I've also set up a whole AI infrastructure to be able to interrogate this 3 million words of podcast to look for trends and things like that. So it's again, it's a kind of a unique part of this particular medium.
I wouldn't have expected less, knowing how you are always at the cutting edge and AI and everything, how you're leveraging it for that. So podcasting is huge today. And like some would say, it's a crowded space. If someone's thinking of starting a recruiting podcast, how do they go about standing out when others like you have this massive head start?
So I think the first thing to say is it isn't a crowded space compared to some other spaces. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but there's something like, it's either 100,000 or 400,000. I can't remember, like podcasts that are active that have had more than 50 episodes or something like that, which is nothing compared to the amount of blogs and TikToks and stuff like that. So that's the first thing to say. However, we are in a relatively kind of small business niche. I know every sort of company in the world has recruiting and talent people, but, I'm sure like the finance world and the marketing world is probably bigger. So it can feel quite crowded. So, the first thing to say is it's not too late to start a podcast, but you have to really, really think about it. If you want to start, just a generic interview podcast, interviewing people you think have got a bit of a network, you're just not going to get very far with it. The thing to think about is, your average heavy podcast listener probably only listens to 2 or 3 podcasts relatively regularly, or 4, not very many. And to get their attention, you're going to have to replace one of those or make them create extra time. So that's the challenge. So I just think it's really important to, think about how you stand out, find an angle, just like you have with this podcast. I think it's fantastic. No one's doing anything like this. So it's kind of finding that angle. What is it that's going to make me stand out? That angle has to absolutely resonate with the audience. So just because you think it's interesting, it doesn't necessarily mean that your audience is going to think it's interesting. So that's another aspect to it. And it has to be something that you enjoy and you're curious about, because podcasting can be quite hard and a bit of a slog. And, you really have to really be engaged with it. So I think if you can kind of meet all of those criteria, then you're going to do well. The other thing about podcasting is there is no easy, I mean, Spotify's made this a little bit better, but there's no easy podcasting discovery. There's no sort of algorithm that's going to throw your podcast at people. So you have to do the work. The way that podcasts grow the most is through word of mouth. It's through people asking people what podcast they listen to. Now, sometimes those conversations will happen in public on LinkedIn, and it's great. See yourself tagged. More than often they don't. So because of that, you have to make your podcast something that people want to listen to and they want to recommend to other people. So that's why the audience is critical in this, because you have to have that base of people who kind of recommend it. So it's quite daunting, but people have successfully done it. But it's just not, I think, particularly during the pandemic, there was kind of an epidemic of people sort of starting podcasts, and it normally went along the same route, which was, I'm starting a podcast. Here's a picture of my studio. I didn't have anything like a studio for about 5 years. I was using some cheap mic and all that sort of stuff. I'm launching the podcast in 6 weeks. Stay tuned. And it's just, I don't care. If you're launching the podcast, launch it. Tell me, give me something to listen to. And those podcasts, some of them didn't even launch, and very few went beyond a few episodes because it's easy. It feels like it's easy to do, but it's difficult to get traction. And also, I think you have to think about why you're doing it. So, when I first started my podcast, it was for that sense of finding out stuff and just doing things in public. So, I didn't even look at the stats for the first 50 episodes, because that wasn't what I was doing and wasn't what I was chasing. And I think sometimes, people might make, particularly brands themselves might make a short series of 5 podcasts that are fantastic, that serve the purpose that you want to fulfill with them. So I think knowing why you're doing it is another important aspect to it. But it's it's not impossible. It's never too late. The mediums are changing all the time. If you can kind of meet all those criteria, then absolutely go for it.
If you were starting Recruiting Future today, like right now in 2025, what would you do differently?
2 things. First of all, I probably wouldn't call it Recruiting Future.
Really?
But the reason for that is over time, obviously talent acquisition is the key focus of it, but it's just much more broader than that. It's the world of work, everything about talent from a TA lens. And I can just see silos kind of breaking down in HR, the world changing. So, maybe I wouldn't have quite the same title. I'm not changing it now because of everything, the brand awareness and everything from the SEO, etc. But maybe a different title. But I would also start building an email list of listeners from day one, not from year 6, basically, because ultimately, you need a way to communicate with your listeners about the podcast and about what's going on, and actually building an email list around it is the best way to do that. So I was very late to the party with that, which is kind of frustrating. So I think that's the thing I'd change.
I like that you said that, as I've been ghosting my email list, but I realized that it keeps growing. I'm like, I should probably email these people. So there's an email going out tomorrow after probably a couple of months. But yeah, it's so important. And really, I think looking back, that's really how the podcast grew at the early stages, because my people on my newsletter would share it, would forward the email to someone else who would then read the email, sign up for my email list, and listen to the podcast. So it's really a good way to grow it too. And like you said, keep that communication. What would you absolutely do the same if you were starting again today?
I would have the same approach to content, have that kind of that future focus thing. I wouldn't buy, this expensive microphone until I've been doing it for about 7 years. I would still be consistent. And I would absolutely, really just make it an audience first podcast. Just really think about, what does the industry need and what can I help give them, rather than what would I like to talk about, which could be quite interesting. And I think that's the real sort of fundamental thing about my podcast that I will I will always stick to, and I think it's why it's still around 10 and a half years later. Actually, it's still rumbling on.
Amazing. So if you've ever watched the show or listened, you know that I like to do segments towards the end, and I'm previewing a new segment with you. This one's called The Cutting Room. Just a few rapid fire questions about the stuff that we don't usually hear, like episodes that you scrap, guests that you still want, etc. Are you ready?
I'm not sure, but go on then. Let's see what happens.
So, was there ever an interview you recorded but you didn't publish?
Yes.
Tell me more.
I've had a couple, one of which was because of just awful sound and we couldn't fix it. One of them was, they'll remain nameless. It's not someone, but it was someone who was, should have been an absolute expert in what they were talking about. And because of the organization that they work for and what they've done. And as we went through the interview, it was just apparent that they weren't, and they were, it was just unsavable. And, I just couldn't publish it. So, that's probably the best example I can think of, just because the content wasn't good enough. And I think that's what sort of motivated me to make sure that I don't take anything for granted, and I speak to everyone before they come on the show, because I thought this person was just absolutely going to be great. And they really were.
Most famous guest that you've had on your podcast?
Good question. Probably Rory Sutherland, the behavioral marketing guy from Ogilvy with the big TED Talks and the really interesting book. He's at Breakfast UK this year. So I had him on 4 or 5 years ago, I think. I've had some other authors on, on as well, but he's probably the standout one for me. And also back on episode 11 or something, I managed to get an interview with Laszlo Bock, who was the global CHRO of Google at the time. And he'd just written a best-selling book. And he kind of came to London, did an interview with the BBC, The Economist, and me.
Wow.
So at the time, that was quite a big, I was like, that was quite a big coup.
Dream guest that you haven't landed yet?
Dream guest that I haven't landed yet. That's a good question. It kind of keeps changing. I'm trying to let me think who, that's a really tough one, because, it's always a moving target. I always really want to get, I'd love to get like a president or a prime minister or someone like that. I almost got the Scottish First Minister on once, which is the closest I could get to a head of state. So a head of state of some kind would be fantastic. So if they're only listening, you have an open invitation to be on the podcast.
I was going to say a really bad joke, because I heard that there might be a head of state that's visiting Scotland right now.
Yeah, well,
let's not even get into that.
Head of state, I'm going to make a few exceptions, for certain people, but yeah.
If you could redo one episode, which one would you redo and why?
That's a good question. I could read it. The trouble is, I have so many episodes. I'm trying to think of examples. I'll give you a bit of a generic answer. There's sometimes that people will come across really well in the introduction topic meeting. And then particularly if they've not done many podcasts before, just not really deliver on the promise of what it looked like they were going to do in the intro meeting. So there's probably a few of those where I felt that the person didn't live up to what they could have done on the podcast. And I think they're the ones that I probably would want to redo. I mean, as I say, there's been a couple that I never published, and I'm also very lucky that I have got a completely ninja editor who can rescue stuff and make it sound amazing, which kind of really helps as well.
Yes, that helps a lot. So I really enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything that you think listeners should know that I haven't asked you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that one of the, and it kind of goes back to an earlier question that you kind of asked me about the creator economy. It's like the kind of the whole notion of sort of professional creators or semi-professional creators. If that's your kind of aspiration, then you are doing two jobs, because you are doing your subject matter thing, but keeping up with these platforms and how they develop and everything is almost a full-time job by itself. I mean, even podcasting, which, the core technology is the same, but the thinking around it has changed, the introduction of video. And it unfortunately, 10 years ago, you could probably just record a podcast, record a video, stick it on YouTube, and it was great. And as you know, the things that you need to know now to be successful on YouTube, to be successful as a podcaster, there's a whole industry around this. So I think if you're, if you want to do this as a job, then you have two jobs. And I think that's kind of just a really important thing to say, because it isn't easy to operate at that level. I mean, anyone can start a podcast and provide value, but if you want to, really go for this and build a really big audience, build really big influence, and do it as a job, then you have two jobs. And I think that's just a really important thing to say.
I love that you said that, because there's so many people out there who are typically selling you something, telling you how easy it is. And as someone who sells production and post-production, especially of podcasts and the clips and all of that, when people come to me and say, I want to start a podcast, I tell them it's one of the most expensive hobbies you will have. So if you're not be sure why you're wanting to do this, because you're going to put in a lot of time and money at times. If you don't know how to edit your own or episodes and stuff like that, you're going to put in a lot of time and money before you can see any results. And if you want to do it well, you have to take it seriously and do it well.
Yeah. And I think you can see it from some of the creators in our space already who are absolutely nailing it on one platform, millions of views, 100,000 views. And then you look at them on another platform and they've got 10 followers and nothing's going on, because, to get that level, you have to be so all in, on your platform. And it's like me with YouTube. It's like when I really educated myself about how YouTube worked, I was like, whoa, I just, I'll put stuff up on there, but I'm not, I'm not expecting to fly with any of it, because that is a kind of another full-time job that I can't really take on.
Yeah, I changed my focus from okay, this platform's going well, I can teach it to my team or someone to run I still always write my content, right? Or produce my content. I'm always involved in the creative of it. But you get to a point where it's okay, we've got this platform down for now because it'll change next week. Let me move on to the next one. And that's why one platform you can see a ton of followers, a ton of traction, and the other, it's hi, I'm new again. So that's the thing with being a creator. You are always new.
Yep.
You are either new on a new platform or you're new because the platform changed. You're always new. You're always 100%. Learning.
Yeah, totally.
So how can listeners connect with you?
Well, first of all, if you don't already, please listen to my podcast. Recruitingfuture.com is the website, but you can find it wherever you listen to your podcast by searching for Recruiting Future. I'm on LinkedIn as Matt Alder. I'm very easy to find. Please connect with me. If you listen to the podcast, please tell me what you think. Doesn't have to be nice as well. If you can see room for improvement, then please let me know. So yeah, really LinkedIn and the podcast are the best places to start with.
And if you want to listen to Matt and I live, unfiltered, unscripted, every week, we are on the Alder Hour, which is part of the Purple Acorn Network, just like Workfluencer, every Monday. I won't even say what time it is because I don't remember what time it is. It's at a different time in every time zone, but it's every Monday. It's live on LinkedIn and on YouTube and also wherever you get your podcast. So
absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that.
I think Evan would be like, you guys did an episode together and did. So thanks so much for listening. If you're enjoying the Workfluencer pod, share it with someone who's changing how we talk about work or who should be. And hey, if this episode gave you ideas or inspiration, leave us a 5-star review. Reviews help other listeners find us. And honestly, it makes my day. Workfluencer is produced by Perceptible Studios. Learn more about how we can help you use video to attract, engage, and retain qualified talent at perceptiblestudios.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll chat with you next week.